When all was settled, a Frey envoy dipped his head. Lord Frey will honor his word. The crossing shall be open at first light for your host. Catelyn exhaled. Robb set his jaw, resigned. Ned, pale with exhaustion, merely nodded. Thus they purchased safe passage. Night fell. Jon lingered near one of the cook fires, picking at a bowl of stew while the northern soldiers joked and bragged about how they would crush the Lannisters. He felt little appetite. The looming war filled him with dread. Soldiers might be confident now, but many would die. He could almost hear ghosts whispering from the future. A voice spoke behind him. "Jon." He turned to see Robb approaching. The fires cast flickering shadows across his face. He looked older than his years. "May I sit?" "Of course." Jon shifted on the log he occupied. Robb settled beside him, removing his gloves. They watched the flames dance for a moment. Finally, Robb sighed. "You've been quiet since you arrived." Jon gave a wry smile. "That's my way." Robb's lips twitched. But still, I want to thank you for keeping Father safe. I know he was wounded. Many men might have left him behind." Jon's chest tightened. "I'd never leave him. He raised me." Robb stared into the fire. "In the north, they say you're his bastard. But you've always been my brother. Blood or no. I'm glad you're here, for whatever comes." Jon looked at him. Guilt and loyalty warred in his heart. "We'll stand side by side, like we did as children." He forced a slight grin. "Though the stakes are higher now than sparring in Winterfell's yard." Robb nodded, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Everything's changed. I'm to marry a Frey. I'm leading an army. I'm not ready for all this, Jon." Jon recognized the raw honesty beneath Robb's confident exterior. He put a hand on Robb's shoulder. "No one's ready for war or for responsibilities thrown at them so quickly. But the North follows you. They believe in you." Robb's voice lowered. "And you?" Jon felt the weight of his Targaryen blood, hidden beneath layers of secrets. But he also felt the bond of brotherhood. "I follow you, Robb, as I always have." Something eased in Robb's expression. "Thank you. Let's hope it's enough." They fell into a contemplative silence, the crackle of the fire a distant reminder of how fleeting warmth could be in a cold, dangerous world. At dawn, Walder Frey kept his word. The drawbridge was lowered, and the gates opened. The entire northern host began to stream across the massive stone bridge linking the two towers of the twins. Robb led the vanguard, accompanied by his bannermen, while Ned stayed with Catelyn and their retinue further back. He was still not strong enough to ride at the front. Arya rode near them, wide-eyed at the imposing towers looming overhead. Jon found himself in the midst of the columns, guiding his horse over the stone archway. Frey guards lined the path, eyeing them with calculating expressions. One gaunt Frey daughter wearing a stained dress tried to flirt with passing knights, while several male Freys in ill-fitting armor stood by. A hush of tension lay over everything, an alliance forged of necessity and scorn. The crossing took hours as thousands of footmen, cavalry, and wagons passed. Still, the Freys stayed true, letting them through unmolested. Once on the western side of the river, the Northmen gathered on a wide plain of grass. Robb conferred with his advisors, deciding the direction of their next march. The word soon spread. They would move south by southwest, aiming to outmaneuver Tywin's host and possibly strike at Jaime Lannister, rumored to be near Riverrun. The strategy was risky, but if it succeeded, they could break the Lannister forces in two. That afternoon, the northern host advanced in a mighty wave. Pikes, spearmen, knights on chargers, archers, men with axes and swords. They carried the banners of countless northern houses, from the White Harbor Trident to the last Hearth Giant. Ned sat upon a horse at the center of the column, pain etched in his features, but resolved to lead. Next to him was Catelyn, dressed in a riding gown and cloak, face tight with worry. Arya rode with them, sometimes gaping at the sheer size of the army. Jon rode near Ned and Catelyn, keeping an eye on the perimeter. He spotted the Blackfish at the head of a contingent of river lords, guiding them toward their homeland. Meanwhile, Rumors flew that Tywin Lannister might be further south near Harrenhal. If so, the route to Riverrun might be open or lightly guarded. Near dusk, scouts reported that Jaime Lannister's force was indeed camped outside Riverrun, laying siege. The defenders inside the castle refused to yield, but their supplies might not last forever. Robb saw an opportunity. If they marched swiftly, they could take Jaime by surprise, sandwiching him between Riverrun's defenders and their own host. That night, Ned presided over a war council in a large tent. Robb was there, as were Brynden, Lady Catelyn, several northern lords, Umber, Karstark, Bolton, Glover, Tallheart, and Jon. Lanterns lit the faces of these men as they pored over rough maps. Robb traced a line along the Green Fork. If Jaime is focused on besieging Riverrun, he might not expect an attack from the north so soon. We can cross at Fairmarket, swing south along the Tumblestone, and hit him from behind. Lord Umber, a gruff giant of a man, nodded. A bold plan, boy. I like it. Put the lions to the sword. Ned cleared his throat, still pale but authoritative. Caution. Jaime Lannister is no fool. He'll have pickets and scouts. We should send outriders to ensure we aren't walking into a trap. Karstark, a dour man with dark hair, agreed. My riders will screen our approach. Catelyn's gaze flicked to Ned. You're wound. He shook his head, expression firm. I'll ride with the main force. I can still command. Robb, you'll take the vanguard. Robb blinked. Father, are you sure? You're still... I'm sure, Ned said. Then his lips curled in a faint, rueful smile. Though I'll have to rely on you for much of the heavy work. We fight together, as father and son, until this is done. Robb looked relieved, though still apprehensive. Yes, father. Jon stood near the map, feeling a mixture of dread and anticipation. War was no place for illusions. He had never truly fought in a pitched battle. Soon he might see its horrors firsthand. He cast a sidelong glance at Arya, who had snuck into the gathering by standing quietly near the tent's entrance. Her eyes gleamed with curiosity and fear. Then we march at dawn, Ned declared. If the gods are good, we'll reach Riverrun in 4 days. May the old gods and the new protect us. And march they did. The Northmen, bolstered by Brynden Tully's riverlords, advanced across fields and wooded glens, always wary of Lannister scouts. Nights were spent in makeshift camps with strict watches posted. Ned's wound held up, though it pained him. He refused to let others see his weakness, setting an example of fortitude. Arya and Jon stuck close, determined not to lose their father again. On the second day, outriders skirmished with small Lannister patrols. Word reached the main army that a few of those enemy scouts had been killed or captured. No large force opposed them yet. Tension simmered, everyone expecting a major clash. By the evening of the third day, smoke appeared on the horizon. Fires from the outskirts of Riverrun, perhaps. Scouts returned with urgent news. Jaime Lannister's camp lay across the Red Fork, siege lines drawn around Riverrun's walls. The Lannisters had built wooden palisades and siege engines, star-bursting with the red and gold lion. If the Northmen attacked swiftly, they might catch Jaime's men off guard. Ned gathered his commanders in a final war council. The plan, a two-pronged assault. Robb would lead the vanguard across a ford and slam into Jaime's flank, while Brynden Tully led a small group around to cut off the Lannister retreat. Ned would direct the main force from a slightly more central position, giving orders and sending reserves where needed. All was arranged with careful precision. That night, Jon could barely sleep. He lay in a tent shared with other Stark retainers, hearing their nervous breathing and the shuffle of feet outside. War was upon them. He thought of Rhaegar Targaryen, the father he had never known, who died in a war long ago. Would Jon share the same fate? Or would he find a different path through the chaos? In the stillness, Arya slipped into the tent, crouching beside him. I can't sleep, she whispered. Jon sat up. The others were dozing or minding their own thoughts. Nor can I, he murmured. She exhaled shakily. If there's a battle, I want to help. Not hide in some supply wagon. Jon smoothed down her hair. Father won't allow you near the fighting. You're only... Arya pulled away. I'm not a child. Then her voice cracked. I'm scared, Jon. I don't want to lose Father again or you. But I want to do something. Jon's heart twisted. I know. War is the worst, but Father will want you safe. Promise you'll follow his orders, whatever they are. She hesitated, tears glistening. Then she nodded, swallowing. All right, I promise. Dawn came, a pale haze over the riverlands. The northern host assembled in silence, men forming ranks with disciplined efficiency. Ned inspected them from horseback, grim-faced. Robb spurred ahead, leading the vanguard with gray wind, his direwolf, padding beside him, a fearsome beast that had grown large. The river lords and the northern bannermen joined him, determination etched on their faces. A low horn signaled the advance. Robb's vanguard broke away, hoofs thundering. The main force followed at a measured pace. Jon rode beside Ned, who looked every bit the Lord of Winterfell, upright in the saddle despite the ache in his leg. Catelyn had insisted on staying behind the lines, but Arya refused to be parted from Ned until the last moment, when guards compelled her to wait at the rear with the other non-combatants. Jon spared a glance back, saw Arya's stricken face, and forced himself to turn forward. They heard the clash of steel and the shouts of men even before the Lannister encampment came into view. Robb's vanguard had smashed into Jaime's pickets, scattering them. Now a line of Lannister spearmen was scrambling to form ranks, red cloaks flapping in the breeze. Siege towers loomed in the distance, half-constructed. Across the river, Riverrun's walls bristled with archers. The main Stark force roared forward. Horns blared. Ned raised his sword, giving the signal. Jon's heart hammered as they galloped into the fray. He saw men in lion-crested helms rushing to defend the perimeter, shouting curses at the unexpected onslaught. The first crash of steel on steel rattled Jon's bones. He found himself in a swirl of chaos. War horses kicking, spears lunging, archers loosing arrows overhead. The Lannisters tried to form a shield wall, but Robb's cavalry crashed into them from one side while Ned's force bore down from another. Jon guided his horse skillfully, adrenaline surging. He parried a thrust from a Lannister man-at-arms, then slashed the man's leg. Another lunged at him, but Jon wheeled, blocking the blow with his shield. The clang reverberated through his arm. A swirl of brown hair caught his eye. One of the Northern Banner Knights reeled in the saddle, an arrow through his chest. Jon gritted his teeth, spurring his horse onward. The entire battlefield was a cacophony of screams, horns, the dull thud of bodies hitting the ground. He heard Grey Wind's savage growl somewhere nearby, the direwolf tearing into Lannister ranks. Ned, flanked by several Stark guards, pressed forward methodically. His sword flashed in the morning light. The pain in his leg must have been excruciating, but he fought on. Jon caught glimpses of him giving orders, pointing men to flank the Lannister archers. A group of enemy cavalry charged from behind a palisade. The ground shook under their hooves. Jon spurred his horse to intercept, calling to nearby Stark men. They clashed in a deafening riot of metal and horseflesh. Jon's sword rang against an opponent's breastplate. A Lannister knight swiped at him, but Jon ducked, narrowly avoiding a killing blow. He countered, blade biting into the knight's unarmored gap under the arm. Blood spurted, and the knight toppled with a muffled cry. Jon swallowed bile. War is monstrous, Ned had said. Now Jon saw it firsthand. He pressed on, fear and adrenaline pumping. Elsewhere, Robb and Brynden Tully led their men around the flank, and the lines of red-cloaked soldiers began to crumble under the combined assault. Jon heard horns from within Riverrun as well, their garrison sallying forth to pin the Lannisters from behind. Amid the chaos, a tall figure in gilded armor caught Jon's eye. Ser Jaime Lannister himself, the Kingslayer, leading a desperate charge to rally his men. His golden hair shone even under the grime of battle. Jaime carved through 2-foot soldiers, searching for the commander of this northern host. Possibly searching for Robb or Ned. Ned was near, though, spurring forward with grim purpose. Jon's breath caught. Ned's wound made him vulnerable against such a formidable foe. He saw Jaime urging his charger toward Ned. With a cry, Jon kicked his own mount, weaving through the melee, desperate to reach his father first. Jaime's lance angled for Ned, whose guard was partially up, but he was slow. Time seemed to slow. Ned twisted in the saddle to parry, but the strain was clear on his face. Jaime's blow might unhorse him or run him through. Jon lunged into the path, swinging his sword to deflect Jaime's thrust. The impact jolted Jon's shoulder, nearly ripping the blade from his grip. Jaime's fierce blue-green eyes locked on Jon with surprise. Then he snorted, contempt twisting his mouth. "So you stand between me and the traitor Stark?" Jaime snarled, tugging his lance free. Jon steadied himself, hands trembling. "You'll not kill him while I still draw breath." Jaime smirked. "Then you'll die first, bastard." He cast aside the lance, drawing his long sword, a glittering blade honed to lethal perfection. Jon steeled himself, recalling every lesson from the yard. Jaime was the realm's most notorious swordsman, but Jaime was also on horseback, and so was Jon. That gave them some parity. Mounted combat was less reliant on footwork. They traded blows, steel clashing. Jaime's strength jarred Jon's arm with each strike. Twice, Jon nearly lost his balance, but he hung on, deflecting. Sparks flew with each collision. Ned tried to circle around, but his own men blocked him inadvertently, defending him from other threats. Jaime hammered at Jon's guard. A cunning feint nearly cost Jon his head. Jon twisted away at the last moment, feeling cold terror in his gut. This was a man who had fought in countless battles, who had faced the likes of the Smiling Knight in the days of the Kingswood Brotherhood. Jon was outmatched, yet he refused to yield. With a snarl, Jaime caught Jon's blade on his crossguard and shoved it aside, slashing at Jon's exposed midsection. Jon managed to jerk his torso back, the edge scraping the mail links. A shallow cut, but enough to sting hotly. He gasped. Jaime raised his sword for a finishing blow. Suddenly, Ned appeared, leading his horse right into Jaime's flank. His own sword coming down in a mighty arc. Jaime parried just in time, forced to shift his attack from Jon. The two older warriors locked swords. Ned's face was taut with pain, yet fierce. Jaime sneered. "I'd have thought you'd be lying in a dungeon, Stark, or in a grave." "I prefer a battlefield," Ned growled, thrusting again. Their blades met in a ringing crescendo. Jaime's charger sidestepped, and Ned pressed the attack. Jaime moved with fluid skill, grinning as though he relished the challenge. Jon, gasping, attempted to regain his posture, preparing to rejoin. But their swirling conflict had drawn more Northmen, who rushed to Ned's defense. Jaime realized he was outnumbered. With a curse, he kicked his charger, wheeling away. Ned, breathing heavily, tried to pursue, but his horse stumbled on uneven ground. Jaime spurred off into the chaos, presumably seeking a safer vantage or rallying point. Jon sagged in the saddle, panting. Blood trickled from the cut at his side, though it did not seem deep. Ned's gaze flicked over him, relief shining. "Are you badly hurt?" Jon shook his head. "I'll live." Ned nodded, eyes scanning the battlefield. "Then keep your wits about you." Together, they surged back into the fray. By now, the Lannister lines were unraveling. Pockets of their men tried to resist, but the North and the River Lords had them surrounded. Near the river, a mass of Lannisters threw down their weapons, surrendering. Jon glimpsed Jaime Lannister once more, tangling with a group of Karstark knights, but a swirl of riders blocked the view. Then a horn blast sounded, Robb's signal from a distant rise. The Lannisters were broken, retreating, or captured. The siege lines around Riverrun collapsed as the castle gates flung open and Tully knights poured out, cheering. A wave of exultation rippled through the northern ranks. They had won the day. Jon reined in, heart-thumping, scanning for Jaime. He saw a flash of gold as the Kingslayer fought on, surrounded by a ring of northern steel. Then, abruptly, Jaime's horse reared, and he was forced to the ground. Men closed in, disarming him. Cheers erupted. The infamous Kingslayer was taken alive. Panting, Jon pulled off his helm. Smoke from burning tents stung his eyes. All around, men raised swords in victory or slumped to the ground in exhaustion. Bodies littered the field, both friend and foe. The stench of blood hung in the air. He glimpsed Ned, half limping as he dismounted with a grunt, letting Stark guards help him stand. Arya came tearing across the field, having somehow slipped free from her watchers, eyes wild. "Father! Jon!" Jon dismounted carefully, meeting her. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but he embraced her all the same, relief flooding him that she was safe. She surveyed the carnage, face white. I saw the towers. I heard the shouting. I had to find you." Ned, leaning on a soldier's shoulder, made his way toward them. He placed a trembling hand on Arya's head. "You're safe. That's all that matters." A group of northern knights surrounded Jaime Lannister in the distance, stripping him of his gilded armor. Robb joined them, gray wind snarling at the Kingslayer's side. The Lannister man's face was contorted with fury and humiliation. This was a massive prize. Jaime captured meant the Lannisters would have to negotiate or risk losing their greatest commander. Perhaps this war could be ended swiftly. But as Jon scanned the field, seeing the fallen men, the ravens circling overhead, he knew the price would be steep regardless. Ned, wincing from pain in his leg, took stock of the dead. Robb Stark had proven himself a capable commander, leading the North to victory this day. Still, Tywin Lannister remained in the field. The new King Joffrey held King's Landing. The realm was riven in two. In that moment, with the sun climbing higher and the smell of blood choking the air, Jon Snow, secret child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, realized that no victory on a single field would save Westeros from the storms to come. The dragons still lingered across the sea, the lion snarled in the south, and the wolf howled for vengeance. If Ned's truth ever emerged, it might tear the realm apart once more.